Yeah, so no such thing as Spider-Man.
No such thing. And it's the...
I just find that very interesting. Sorry.
It's a superhero world.
What were you about to write?
From a female perspective.
So going into this, I mean, what % of Marvel movies have you seen? Let's be real. And this isn't meant as a negative. Like, again, just...
4%. Which is like 15 minutes of one.
I can see the future. Oh, what the hell? She didn't see that coming? That's not how it works.
While we're still reeling from the likes of the Marvels and Blue Beetle, Madam Web has tried to trap us up with its own web of nightmares.
This needs to stop now.
It's a superhero movie with no superheroes, an action movie with no action, and with painfully boring characters and dialogue that make Morbius look like The Godfather 2. Overall, movies like this make me glad to see big-budget Hollywood movies struggling at the box office lately. Everyone can see that the higher-ups at these billion-dollar companies don't have a clue about what they're doing and really need all the embarrassment they can get until they realize it as well. I talk about this more extensively in an earlier video. Studios are fond of not knowing what the fans want to see. Sony may be the worst. I don't think they even care what fans want to see at this point. You'll get that obscure standalone movie with a fringe E-list comic character no matter how embarrassing it is to watch. With Madam Web, the only thing more embarrassing than its inevitable box office bombing is the quality of the movie itself. And we didn't need to see the future like she does to see it coming. Madam Web is like It Follows and The Terminator had a child by the latest Fantastic Four movie. It's lifeless, awkward, and sometimes totally nonsensical. Scientists will study this movie for years, but I doubt Sony or Hollywood will learn a lesson from it. The movie's script was written with a crayon and in bullet points by the same geniuses that brought us Morbius and Gods of Egypt. Every line is either poorly placed or expository babble, and every line reading felt like a Zoom meeting with internet lag. And you can't even bury the script under action or style, because there is none whatsoever. The camera work is awful and the editing is aggressive enough to kill a small Victorian child. There's a scene where she gets trapped in the car that goes under the Hudson River. I counted over 30 cuts. 30 plus cuts in a scene not even 2 minutes long. Not only is Madam Web set in 2003, it also tries to take the superhero genre 20 years behind. The movie follows a paramedic who develops psychic superpowers and must use them to protect 3 teens who may become Spider-Women from an evil Spider-Man who believes those Spider-Women will kill him in some faraway future.
Madam Web has no backstory.
Now, let's put aside the boneheaded idea of doing a Madam Web film in the first place. Let's take a look at what was actually given to us. A stalker, Terminator, Spider-Man goes after 3 potential Spider-Women. There's lots of potential there, and ways to make it appealing and watchable. Perhaps the 3 women have distinct personalities and skills that they get to use to defeat the... No, they just scream and run away all the time like generic video game NPCs. Well then, Madam Web must use her future-seeing powers in clever ways to... No. Every interesting choice is carefully avoided. What does Madam Web do with her clairvoyance? She hits the Terminator Spider-Man not once, but twice with moving vehicles. And if you think the slash-stalk concept will be exploited for tension, you're wrong. Because the threat is so minor that Madam Web has time to take a trip to Peru in the middle of the film to learn stuff about her mom and exotic spiders. The villain, Ezekiel, is an absurd caricature of a bad guy. I see the potential with an evil stalker Spider-Man, but Ezekiel does nothing to sell this and has some laughably bad dialogue and delivery, which is sometimes painful to watch. There was some really weird editing going on with his voice as well. I don't know how you can get away with that on an $80 million budget when movies like Godzilla Minus One do way better sound editing with a small fraction of that. The fact that Cassandra can see things before they happen and then change them was fun at first, but it drains all tension from the film eventually. If anything goes wrong, it can just be fixed. The further along the movie gets, the more downright irritating it gets seeing the same thing happen with minor tweaks. After a while, all the life or death situations seemed like a coin toss with the same outcome on both sides, and it kills any potential for natural, affable dialogue. The script feels like a first draft that barely got out of the bullet point stage. Characters take turns blandly reciting surface level dialogue that is basically plot narration masquerading as conversation. It's exactly as clunky and charmless as it sounds.
You don't have to know anything about anything at all to watch this movie.
I think they may have handed out Xanaxes like bubblegum on the set, because the cast is sleepwalking through the material. Johnson, in particular, gives such flat, nearly monotone responses. She seemed genuinely stunned to have signed the contract for this movie. I heard she sacked her agent the week the trailer came out. You know, I like to play devil's advocate and find something likable to anchor this. Morbius was super bad, so bad it was memed into oblivion, and yet there are elements of it I genuinely enjoyed. Madam Web is hot garbage all the way through. I'll watch anything with time so I tried to enjoy some parts, like the precognitive powers, but there's not even a crumb of relief or likability or meme potential like Morbius. If this was a deliberate attempt to recapture the so bad it's kind of good but not really vibe of Elektra and Catwoman, then it's bewildering on every level. Those movies had something funny or interesting enough to gain some cultural relevance, not to mention some girl bossing. I didn't laugh a single time while watching this, and the only lasting memory of Madam Web I'll have is Ezekiel's hilarious voice, and the characterization of the girls feels regressive at best, from the dizzying camera moves and malicious editing, to the terrible writing, acting, and visual effects. It fails at being a bad movie, which is not something we see often. I don't even know how this was greenlit. It was shot like a bad CW pilot and written by the writers of Morbius. I would personally like to observe their creative process. It's unclear whether anyone who made this even likes movies, but signs point to no. Madam Web feels like the most artistically bankrupt movie I've ever seen. All efforts to establish depth were half-assed. The theme of parental abandonment situationally unifying these characters is just that, situational. It had no impact on the hero's journey and could have been exercised without anyone noticing. The ties to Spider-Man also felt particularly forced. So many narrative threads were easily dropped, so many discarded characters, and all the suit stuff turned out to be visions. But the worst part is knowing that this wasn't the misguided failed attempt by people who actually want to create something. Spider-Man had kept Sony fed for a few decades, since getting the rights from Marvel, so it's obvious why it keeps squeezing the characters for new material. That it's releasing Madam Web in the wake of last year's awesome Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse isn't surprising. When a company throws every desperate idea at the wall, failure is inevitable. This is nothing more than a vehicle for executives to try and sell products to an audience they clearly have no interest in even trying to understand, by using an artistic medium they have no respect for, or just another tax write-off. My expectations for this movie were low, even by Sony's standards. I refuse to believe Sony executives didn't intentionally go out of their way to make this movie as bad as it can be. It is not just one of the worst superhero movies ever made, but one of the worst movies, full stop. It embodies everything that's wrong with Hollywood and their conveyor belt system of movie making. Why aren't people going to the cinema anymore? Well, this is why.